Alrighty, so thanks for coming to Building the Gen Z Household, my TED Talk here at the St. Lawrence Center. I'd like to start with a prayer in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God, help us to determine our vocations. Give us the grace we need to do that. And give us the courage and the wisdom that we need to live our vocations out. As we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So this talk is kind of the product of my observations of the pop culture in recent months and years surrounding a sort of return to traditional values, especially traditional gender roles, and discussions of that sort of thing amongst Generation Z, or Zoomers, as I call them usually. So it's partly that and partly my interest as an economist, as a financial economist, on home ownership and the importance of that in a modern American context, and the difficulty of the current conditions for late millennials, but mainly Generation Z, who's trying to get into that thing now and is having a hard time figuring out how to do that financially. So this is a sort of blend of those two subjects. So start off with a disclaimer. This is my opinion and not my employer's. Everybody in here knows who my employer is, and so I'm definitely not speaking on behalf of them. My expertise on this comes from the fact that I've been a husband and father for 14 years now. Our wedding anniversary was yesterday. So, yeah, thank you. And then, so that's for most of the, the initial discussion here on gender roles and that sort of thing. And then, finally, at the end, I'll be talking about financial economics and home buying and stuff like that. And so, I've been an economist and a finance professor. I've been an economist for, 16 years probably. And I've been a finance professor over the last several years as well. The assumptions that I'm making about my audience is that you are discerning a vocation to marriage, or you're married, and potentially that you are dating with the intention to marry, or are engaged, as our host is. I'm assuming, again, my audience is young faithful Catholics that accept the church's teaching on faith and morals. If that's not you, that's fine, okay? But just know who my intended audience is and who I'm trying to speak to. So the first thing I want to start off with is a framework for the discussion on traditional roles. So this framework leans on the notion that men and women have distinct roles in the household, and that those roles are universal in the sense that they apply to wives and husbands in general, Catholic faith, right? Catholic means universal. And these are things that come to us from church teaching, from the Bible, and really just from sort of the experience of the Western world throughout really most or all of its of our history, right? That a lot of what I'm going to be talking about leans on this very long record of how things work up until the 1960s, up until the sexual revolution, the advent of feminism and these sorts of things. So the framework itself is this, that as husbands and as wives, we have duties and burdens that form the basis of our own action in these relationships. And those duties and burdens, when we complete them faithfully, they result in rights and benefits that we are owed by our counterpart or by our children, and that sort of thing. So, to start off, I'm going to start off talking to the guys, and what I'm going to do is start with some things that, in my perception, the world tells men. So, the world tells men that marriage isn't worth it, right? So there's a lot of people who will say that, look, you should just check out and ignore marriage because it's not worth your time. The legal system is against you when it comes to marriage, which I think is unfortunately true. And so rather than do anything about that, you should just sort of lean into the sort of red pill ideology, become a pickup artist, or just smoke weed and be docile, and don't worry about having a legacy, right? Don't concern yourself with those things. Still other voices, and I guess you could, I guess in the context of this being a Zoomer talk, you would hear potentially from boomers or Gen X, happy wife, happy life. Okay, so that your wife is really, it's the old ball and chain, gotta ask the boss, right? These sorts of phrases that you hear often in a sort of joking manner, but I think really the reality is it's not a joking manner. These people will tell you that at best you can only contribute to household decisions, and that compromise is essential. So you have your perspective, your wife has her perspective, and you must compromise. The bottom line is that married men don't deserve any direct personal benefits as a result of being husbands and being fathers. That's what the world is telling us. On the contrary, marriage may be your vocation, right? If you're discerning a vocation to marriage, or if you're married, then this is an important part of your life. This is an important part of the way God made you, and this is an important part of the role you need to fulfill in this life so that you can be with God in the next. So ignoring this, or just sitting around smoking weed and being docile will not do, because marriage as an institution is an important part of God's plan for you if you have a vocation to marriage. Men have been beaten down by feminism, and the sexual revolution, while certainly beneficial in a sense to men of very poor morals, you can think about examples like the proliferation of birth control and things like that, the disconnect between women's chastity and their value as mates, right? Taking those things away has resulted in really a beating down of men, and especially this idea of that you don't deserve any direct personal benefits, that you have to just fulfill all these roles, you have to bear these burdens, but you don't get anything for it yourself. And so those things are false. It's not true. So this is a common verse that people will refer to, and so I'll go ahead and read it. It's Ephesians 5:22 through 24. Wives, be subject to your husbands as you are to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, just as Christ is the head of the church, the body of which he is the Savior. Just as the church is subject to Christ, so also wives ought to be in everything to their husbands. So to me that reads fairly clear. And I think if you look at different versions, whatever different translations, you get the same thing. And I think the problem that we have is that oftentimes on a Sunday, you might hear someone preach on this, But you will not hear, you'll get a lot of hemming and hawing so as not to offend the sort of dominant religion of our age, which is the sexual revolution and feminism. Okay? So as not to offend that ideology, we soften this up. And we take away the sort of direct meaning of this, and we say, well, this just means that, you need to love your wife and you need to be a team, right? Or some nonsense like that. This is not true, okay? The plain meaning of this is quite clear. Wives, be subject to your husbands as you are to the Lord. In Genesis 2, the first description of woman is a helper, okay? I submit to you that the notion of a helper cannot be someone who is an authority over someone else. If I have a helper, if I'm a welder, for instance, a welder's helper is not the welder's boss. A welder's helper is someone who does what the welder needs them to do. Okay? So, let's talk about men's burdens and duties. These are, I think, fairly well agreed upon in general, in the sense that even with the sexual revolution, the duties that men have largely been preserved, so that you're still responsible for these things, and society in general expects them out of you, right? But then when it comes to the rights and benefits part, that's where things go missing. So the first general burden or duty that you have is to provide. So what does this mean? It means that you ensure that your wife and children have adequate food, shelter, and clothing. And in accordance with your judgment, members of the household have their wants met as well. Have the things that are nice in life, okay? In accordance with your judgment. That's provision. Protect. What does this mean? Well, obviously in a more primitive setting, then protection takes on a sort of physical type of thing, and that is an important part of it. If there's a bump in the night, right, then you're the one who goes downstairs to figure out why there was a bump, right? It's not the kid's job, it's not your wife's job. The way I put this, ensure that the family's rules for behavior are in accord with good judgment regarding the physical and spiritual safety of each member of the family. Okay, so it's about sort of setting the stage or setting the general rule set for the household. It's also defending the family against physical, emotional, and spiritual threats. So notice I didn't just say physical there. I include emotional and spiritual threats as well. So you have to protect your family from things that will do real harm to them. Not that you protect your kids from every little possible thing that might make them uncomfortable, but when it comes to actual serious harm, it's your job to ensure that the milieu of the household, the rule set of the household, is going to be conducive to the protection or the safety of the family. The last one is equally important, and the idea here is you want to be the visual, spiritual head and emotional foundation of your household. So the spiritual head, and what that means is you are ensuring that the family does the things that it's supposed to do with respect to your duty to your parish, your prayer life, and all of these sorts of things, right? That the buck stops with you, okay? And emotional foundation. So look, things can get kind of hairy sometimes. And kids are pretty wild sometimes because they're trying to figure things out, right? And sometimes when you're talking to your spouse and women tend to have, psychologists say women are higher in what they call negative affect. So they used to call that neuroticism, but then they decided that was offensive. And so you just say women are neurotic. Well, it's not. That's what they mean. And so the thing is, there's an important sense in which you can be the emotional foundation of your household, and your wife kind of needs that consistency. She needs that constant, I don't know, the solidness of that. So benefits. These are the things that largely, in my view, have been robbed from men. The first one is decision making. So this really just makes sense. You can't properly protect and provide without having the final say when there's a conflict regarding a decision between husband and wife. Point me to a successful company that has multiple CEOs, right? It doesn't exist because the buck has to stop with one person. Okay? One person has to have the final say because otherwise you have compromise, and compromise is just a recipe for, no one's ever happy with compromise, right? And so, again, we take this idea of, wives be subject to your husbands. Well, this just makes sense. Again, you are asked to be the protector and provider. So the physical needs of the household are met by your direct action. Well, it just makes sense that you get to decide how those things work. Right? It would not make sense to be otherwise. Now, that doesn't mean you don't ask for, input. My lovely wife Lana's here, and I ask for her input all the time. And what we found, and I think she would agree, and she can answer questions later at the Q&A, is that once she has kind of just let go of this need to constantly be involved in decisions or to worry about the decisions of the household, she feels a lot more at peace, and I feel a lot better about going to her about things. Because I know at the end of the day, I get advice if I want it. Maybe it gives me a different point of view, and then I either use it or I don't. Right? And at the end of the day, the household rises or falls on me anyway. Right? I'm going to get the blame if things go poorly. So, again, it just makes sense. If you're going to be the one that has to protect and provide, you got to be the one that makes the final call. And again, this sounds very negative, but the reality is it creates a lot of harmony. Because it reduces the conflict tremendously when you just agree on this. A peaceful, joyful home. Sirach 26, I forget the verse, but a loyal wife brings joy to her husband, and he will complete his years in peace. Now look, these are not easy things for guys to have on their own with a bunch of kiddos without a wife. There's something about coming home to her. She's so lovely. She smiles. She gives me a big hug. We get to sit together. There's a lot of relaxation and peace that I get from that I can't get if she's not home. If she's not home, I just, the workday just sticks on me. Okay? So this is a very important thing because, you're going out in the world, you're dealing with all of the nonsense and pressure and all of these things that the world throws at you in the context of a job, and you need someone to kind of take that away from you. And she's very good at that, your wife. Support from your wife in your struggles and for your aspirations. So Proverbs 31:23, her husband is known in the city gates, taking his seat among the elders of the land. So, I'm not a theologian, obviously, but to me, that makes sense. It's like, look, if she's supporting him well, then he's fulfilling his role in the community, right? It's not that she has some fancy role in the community, right? That's not what we're saying here. That's not what's being said in Proverbs. It's that he is able to fulfill his role because she's with him, okay? So, moving on to the ladies. We don't have one here, I guess. She's not here. Yeah. Okay, so what does the world tell women? Well, the first thing, and this really was something that Lana said that I needed to include, is the idea that tone is everything. And the issue here is that, again, psychologists tell us that women are high in negative affect. And so when a conflict breaks out about a decision and she does not feel as though she was fully heard or that her emotions were soothed enough by the conversation, then it's possible that she might seek solace with a friend or something like that, which all that is fine, but it needs to be done, you need to seek the advice of friends who have good marriages, not the ones who don't. Because it tends to be the case that if women have friends who are divorced, they tend to get divorced more likely. So I think there's the root of that, I think, is in this idea of tone and just worrying about the emotional way in which someone says something rather than the way they say it. Men tend to be more direct, and it's not that they're being rude, they're just, they just think direct is efficient, which it probably is, but, sometimes there are other ways of doing things. The world tells women that there are no universal duties for wives and mothers. It's all about how you feel. If you feel today that you should be married and have children, your children are these little ornaments that you get to pull around with you, right, for status, that's great. But as soon as you hear the right Reba McEntire song, you decide that you're going to go out on your own and see things out there, right? You're too cooped up. And so you have no duty to the family in the sense that your these rights that you should expect, have burdens and duties attached to them. So again, this is the sexual revolution basically saying that men have all of the burdens and duties that they've always had, but none of the benefits. Women have all of the benefits, but they have none of the burdens or duties. And just to anticipate this, this is not woman hating or some such nonsense. This is feminism hating or sexual revolution hating. Okay, so there's a difference here. Even if you're married, you have to be financially independent. And this one is tragic, I think, because there's an incentive problem here. And as an economist, I'm going to talk about incentives all the time. But there's this notion out there that you have to be financially independent. There's a lot of marriages where you're sort of like roommates in a way. There's two people who have financially, have financial separation. They have two different accounts. They both have jobs, and they split the bills. And I don't think we ever really noticed how common that is these days until one time we were at a store and we were joking around, and I said something like, "I'll bet you, X amount of money that something will happen." I can't remember what the example was. And then, she's laughing and she's like, "Oh, I'll take that bet." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I bet you will, because it'll just go right back into the same account." And the cashier behind the counter is like, "Wow, that's kind of weird." He's like, "That's wholesome." And it's like, "What, wholesome? Like, that's just normal, right?" And then I realized it's not. That, these are just sort of glorified roommate arrangements. And they shouldn't be, right, if they're marriages. Another issue that I've run into in conversations with people about this sort of thing is that if you go into the relationship with this financial independence in mind, okay, that you're not going to have dependence on the other, right, based on their role, okay? That I'm not going to be dependent on her for things based on her roles, that she's not going to be dependent on me based on my roles. If I go into the relationship that way, then what that does is it sort of makes me always have one foot out the door, right? I'm not going to be as careful, and I have, I know people that I can point to as examples for this, but obviously I won't. But you're less likely to listen to advice about caution with respect to that person, because you think, I'm independent anyway. I don't need to be worried about that person's behavior today. I'm sure they'll be good enough, and if not, I'll just leave. Right? So this financial independence thing sets up a sort of problem from the start, in the sense that you just don't expect the thing to last, or you say that if it doesn't, I can always walk away. Well, if that's the way you're going into it, then you're not going to be as careful, I think, about the sort of solidification of this thing as a relationship. On the contrary, as I said before, there are universal duties for wives and mothers. And I guess a short way to say this is that traditional treatment, right, all of the things that we sort of expect out of sort of chivalry or what have you, is for traditional women, right? So it makes sense that there are things that you do that make you more or less valuable in your role as a wife, right? That makes it that you're doing well as a wife or that you're doing poorly, right? These sorts of things. And that's an important gauge for yourself and for your husband and for your vocation. You both have to rely on each other for the things that are necessary for you in the marriage. If not, the marriage will fail. So I kind of explained that a minute ago. His tone is not everything, and I think this excessive reliance on this tone policing sort of thing really betrays kind of a lack of trust. And potentially that trust is undermined when we're sort of walking into this scenario with lots of reservations, with always having this sort of other plan in the back of our head. Look, you can be an exemplary mother and have a successful career. But the problem is you can't do them at the same time. Okay? But again, this is something that everyone is told. We're all told that from an economic standpoint, men and women are just interchangeable, right? It's like, it's a red ball and a blue ball, or it's one piece of machinery or another, right? That from a job perspective, they're no different. And so whatever, it doesn't matter. But just think about it logically. If I had 2 full-time jobs and they require different skill sets, which they do. Being a wife and a mother is a different skill set than making PowerPoints for some corporation, right? Those are different skill sets. If I had to do 2 different tasks that require different skill sets full-time, then one of them would suffer. Or I would end up doing one of them part-time. Well, which one am I going to do part-time? I think, unfortunately, the choice is a lot of times the wife and mother side. Right? So the point is, at the end of the day, there are trade-offs there. And so why put yourself in a scenario where you're going to have to deal with those trade-offs? Why not specialize? Okay. So now, you might say, well, this is all great for you, some bald guy saying all this stuff, but you're not a woman, so therefore you can't have any logical arguments about anything related to women, right? Of course, that makes a ton of sense. Well, there is a quite well-known article in the NBER working paper series. This is a very kind of high status sort of publication for economists. The second author here, Justin Wolfers, was in Obama's cabinet for a long period of time. So this is a very high level type of stuff. And just to kind of summarize this, so the title of the article is The Paradox of Declining Female Happiness. So the idea of a paradox here is that what the authors say is that, look, objectively, or sort of from the statistics, women have been doing all these wonderful things since the sexual revolution that we think are so great for them, right? And now there are some hidden assumptions here, right? One of them is that men and women are just interchangeable widgets, that they're just the same thing with, more prettier hair or less prettier hair, right? That's all the difference is. Well, it turns out telling women that they have to be in the workforce or else they're not good enough, telling women that they have to try to juggle 2 very important things, like being a wife and mother and contributing to the household. In another talk that I gave here a year or 2 ago, I talked about the fact that this is probably a massive contributor to declining wages. Right? You double the labor force, guess what happens to the wage rate? It goes down. Right? Just makes sense. All of these things, all of these wonderful new things that women are doing that basically just make them more like men, okay? Supposedly, that would make them all happier, right? Well, it turns out it doesn't. So the problem with this article's title is the paradox part. There's no paradox here. As a society, the sexual revolution has pushed women into doing things that men do, and then being aghast that they become less happy. Okay? But this is what they find. Massive look at all kinds of surveys over decades of women's happiness. Women have become less happy in general and less happy relative to men over this time period. Feminism, employment in the workforce, and financial independence have made women miserable. Okay? That's the way I summarize this. You can read the article yourself. It's a nice article. It's very long. It's like a book. But it's interesting to read their framing. And if you change the framing by 25 degrees, it makes total sense. The problem here. You just have to see the framing for what it is. So what are these burdens and duties that I'm claiming are sort of universal or that have made sense across all of our history in the Western world? Well, one, manage the internal affairs of the household. Look, no one is closer to you than your mother, right? No one. And in my mind, from the perspective of the day-to-day of childhood, especially young childhood, women are very adept at that. It's something that they do well. Not that men can't do it, just that, again, it's this idea of what is proper, right? The primary caregiver to the children, and I would say to the husband, right? The thing I need the most when I get home from work is I need somebody to take care of me because I feel worn out, stressed out, talking to people all day, even though I enjoy talking to people. You know, just the context of work, right? Work is work. The reason they pay you for it is because you don't want to do it, right? So you spend 8-10 hours a day doing things you don't want to do. It's nice to have someone that you do want to see, someone that you do want to spend time with. Right? And she's very good at being in that receptive role, right? You can sort of get a physical component to this, right? If you know what I'm saying, there's a sort of receptiveness to her role there. Bring peace to the home, and I go back to Sirach 26. But there's just something about my ability to make the kids into a big ruckus and get them all excited and have fun, things like that. And there's something about her ability to get them to do the opposite of that, to help them relax and be calm. Support him in his role as husband, father, and representative of your household. So look, supporting him in his decisions and aspirations. And again, this just emphasizes the point about it's important to pick the right one. Now, not the right one as in there's only one person and it's a Disney fairy tale nonsense, but to pick to somebody who is going to work with you, who makes sense, who your parents and your trusted friends think is of high moral character, right? These are important things. And if you do that, then it makes sense for you to support him in these things that he does, because his successes will be the successes of the whole house. His failures will be the failures of the whole house. He needs that helper, right, from Genesis. He needs that helper. So what should she rightly expect from all of this, right? Of course, this is, many people will say being a housewife and a mother is a super difficult job and it's super hard. What would you say to that, Lana? Do you think that's accurate, that it's a super hard job?
It has its challenges, but I don't think what I do is as hard as what you do.
Okay. So. That's what she usually tells me. So, turns out, getting to spend your whole day with your own children is kind of a really nice blessing. And that's sort of like the reason why we've done it for the entirety of our history up until 1960. Okay? Because it makes a ton of sense. There's an old story called Chesterton's Fence. You'll have to look it up because I don't want to go into the whole thing. But it's basically like, if things have been done for a certain way for a really long time, that's not just a dog whistle about oppression or some nonsense like this, okay? No, it's probably because it works. Probably because doing things a different way has a lot of cost to it. Okay. She gets the blessing of focusing on her vocation while she ensures the basic physical needs, while while he ensures the basic physical needs of the family are met. So, her material needs and wants, in accord with the family's financial means, are met without her direct effort. So, without her direct effort, she gets a house, she gets a car, she gets clothing, she gets all these other things she needs. She gets to make a lot of decisions that I just kind of basically delegate to her as far as what we eat in our house and what our kids need, how we talk about how they ought to be disciplined and that sort of thing. But it's her who's doing those things on a daily basis, during the day, during the bulk of the day, while I'm away making sure that we can afford all of that stuff. So that is a tremendous benefit. She gets a flexible schedule. And I guess I'm going to have to talk about the physical thing again, which can be awkward. But look, there's a big difference between the way men's energy fluctuates and the way women's energy fluctuates. For guys, you have low energy at night and you have high energy during the day. That's just the way we are, right? We're sort of like the sun. We've got energy when we're rested, and at the end of the day, we're not rested and we feel like garbage, right? Not so with women. Okay. Yes, there is a daily fluctuation to their energy level, but there's also a monthly fluctuation to their energy level, right? At least until they're in their 50s or whatever, right? And so, look, the flexibility in her schedule is a wonderful thing for her because she doesn't have to have this terrible week where she feels like garbage and she has to go into the office and do all the normal things she would be expected to do every other week of the month, right? She sets her schedule. It's a tremendous benefit to her. She doesn't answer to anybody. If she answers to anybody, she answers to the person who loves her more than anybody else on the planet, allegedly, right? Maybe her mom. Maybe her mom is, in contention there, but I would argue it's me.
Strike Elijah like just.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to talk like a lawyer, But, so she answers to anyone, it's me. Well, can you imagine having a boss who cares about you? Like, that would be weird, right? Bizarre. So, this flexible schedule is really something that I think is good for women to have, right? It's a beautiful thing that, we have all of this wonderful technology. I mean, this is really an interesting thing. Every job out there, every job we do out in the work world is directed at preserving and making her life better. Her role is the purpose of those things. Perpetuation of our own culture, perpetuation of our own people, right? Perpetuation of our species, right? If you want to put it that way. That's the point of all this stuff. That's why we're building bridges, right? That's why we have factories. That's why we've come up with, in a very direct way, we've come up with all these wonderful methods of making the home tasks much easier than they ever have been. So if anything, her job's much easier than it was 100 years ago. I still have to talk to 20-year-olds every day, so maybe that was easier back then, I don't know.
It's okay to laugh.
Yeah, no, Phil's used to my sarcasm. So I'm getting you used to it, but
I'm getting there.
yeah. Free time for social engagement, especially with other mothers and extended family. Look, we're a homeschool family, so maybe that's something that, you're not thinking about or whatever. We've essentially done that since day one for our children. And this is a tremendous benefit as well, because she gets to spend time with the people who matter for our community, our circle, our parish. And she gets a lot of time to spend with her mother and her father, her sisters, all of these things that she wouldn't normally get to do if she had a 9-to-5 job. When we have personal struggles in our family, it's much better to have someone who already has free time or can very easily make free time to go do those things that we need to do if someone is sick or something like that, rather than trying to figure out how to fit these things into 2 work schedules. Common duties. What are some common duties between the two? The first will be the sort of less important of the two. And I say here, the support of the parish and secular communities. Yeah, so I'm a convert, so of course my family history is a little non-Catholic. It's very non-Catholic. But my grandfather was a Mason, and my grandmother was an Eastern Star. And she did a tremendous amount of stuff. That's the ladies' version of the Masons, yeah. She did a tremendous amount of stuff for their community. And she was able to do that in part because she was a farmer's wife, and she just kind of did the home base thing. That's what she did. She managed the home. She managed the children. And as the children aged, she got more and more time to do these other things that the community needs that we just don't really make time for anymore because everybody feels like they got to have a career. Think about that. If every married woman, when her children were teenagers, had the time to contribute to things in their community, whether it's your secular community or whether it's your parish, how much easier would our parishes function? How much better would our cultural enrichment be, right? This one's probably the most awkward topic. I kind of wish this was beer now. There's this concept called the marital debt, and again, sort of referring to a more kind of popular term that you hear more often these days. Starting off, basically, this is fairly simple. It's openness to life, right? So when you go through marriage prep, your priest is going to talk to you about being open to life and not availing yourself of the demonic birth control and all these silly things. So that this sort of inherent productivity of the marriage, right, is an important thing. And then oftentimes this is framed as unitive and procreative. So we sort of covered the procreative part. But the unitive part is also extremely important. So I'm going to quote a couple things. I'm going to quote a Bible verse and a papal document. So the first one is this Bible verse, 1 Corinthians 7:3-5. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a set time, to devote yourselves to prayer, and then come together again so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now, again, I think there's a sort of plain reading here, and then there's a sort of muddied version that sounds less horrifying to the sort of liberal sexual revolution feminism that we have as a sort of dominant religion in the world we live in. And so just to put a finer point on the idea that this is a decent reading, this plain reading makes sense, let's go to Casti Connubii, which is, the title is Chaste Marriage. Okay, that's Latin for chaste marriage. This was written by Pope Pius XI, one of the greats, in my opinion, on the social issues of our days, from 1930. So much more recently than whenever Paul was writing that other letter, right? And so here in sort of plain Latin or English, the second blessing of matrimony, which we said was mentioned by St. Augustine, is the blessing of conjugal honor, which consists in the mutual fidelity of the spouses in fulfilling the marriage contract, so that what belongs to one of the parties by reason of this contract sanctioned by divine law may not be denied to him, and we would say or her, right, to mirror the sort of reciprocality in this verse as well, or permitted to any third person. So of course that last part is, don't cheat on your spouse, pretty obvious. But again, I think what this does is it shows us a sort of clear reading of, that the sort of plain reading of 1 Corinthians 7:3-5 is something that we can rely on. It's not just a product of its time, or it's not just Paul kind of off the cuff talking to a specific group of people or any of that kind of nonsense. Okay. And, were this room different, I think this would be harder for me to talk about, but it's okay. It's mostly the guys. So, look, the issue here is that a lot of this discussion about dating in the context of consent and all of this sort of thing, right? This, I think, has gotten pushed into marriage discussions, where really, in a lot of ways, it just doesn't make sense. So, of course, this whole consent thing in dating really shouldn't be an issue in the first place, because you shouldn't be doing stuff like that when you're dating. And so it should just be unnecessary, right? But in the context of marriage, I think from the guy's perspective, a lot of times men are worried about resource constraints, and they tend to get a little bit, I guess I'll say gun shy when it comes to adding more children to the family and being generous with their openness to life. And so there might be a sense in which they would want to, abstain purely for that purpose. When there's not some kind of legitimate, serious reason to do so. Of course, we have, NFP and all of that sort of thing. But putting that aside. On the other hand, I think in the modern world we have a problem where from the ladies we get this kind of disassociation from this kind of thing, from this sort of marital act, I guess is the way to call it, right? The marital act. A lot of times women, they get the number of children that they want, and then, they're really just not in the mood for that sort of thing, and so they have a headache or this or that, and they don't feel that it's incumbent upon them to engage in this sort of activity, even though I think, look, if you don't like this, you're not talking to me, you're talking to, St. Paul and Pope Pius XI, right? That this is the way things ought to be. In a loving marriage, there ought to be this sort of physical component, right? And so this whole idea of, I've got a headache and blah, 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 and this sort of thing is very destructive to the marriage. If you want to emasculate your husband, this is probably the easiest way to do it. The easiest way to do it is to just deny him this as often as you can. He will become depressed. He will not really care about his work. He will feel that he has no purpose in the household. You will emasculate him. And this is horrifying, right? Horrifying that someone would want to do this to their spouse, I think. And honestly, in my mind, equal to the degree to which it's horrifying to want to, just capriciously cut off the number of children you have just for your own comfort. So, there are all manner of crude ways of putting this, but I'll try to avoid all that and just be polite.
Thanks.
And just leave it there. Yeah, kind of unusual of me not to be crude, right, Mark? Yeah, so maybe I'm getting better. Okay, common benefits. So far, I have talked exclusively about sort of one side and the other getting benefits out of this. And it makes sense to do that because, men and women are different. And so the benefits that they get from this marriage are going to be different, and they're going to be complementary to the things that they are providing. Okay? Nevertheless, there are common benefits. The first one, respectful, educated, and conscientious children. I guess I'm just going to brag a little bit. There's really no other way to do this. So we have 3 children. Our oldest is 14, and our youngest is 6. And I don't even know how many times this has happened, but we'll just be at some restaurant, and we'll be sitting there as a family. And, and this is when our kids, especially when they were much younger. So our 14-year-old would have been, 8 or 9 or something like that. And, I thought maybe they were being a little rowdy, but, they're at a restaurant, it's loud. Kids get involved in that stuff. But, and again, I don't know how many times this happened, but we always had some boomer couple come over to us, and the lady would just be like, your kids are so well behaved, they're just so sweet, and they're so calm. And it took me a while, but I realized it's like, a lot of people don't bring their kids because they can't. because their kids are just screaming like banshees the whole time, or they're freaking out, they have to take them out, right? They're just unruly. And I was a much worse kid than my kids are. Bless you. And I really put a lot of that to the fact that we have, generally speaking, followed this kind of general guidebook. Now, we've gotten a lot better about following these types of things in the last 8 months or so, but in general, the fact that she's always been home with them in their, very young years, it's contributed a lot to their ability to be, respectful of other people, especially, they're homeschooled, so they see a lot of people of a range of ages all day long, every day. Every day they go out, they see different people that aren't their exact age, right? You think about school, you just sit in a room full of people that are all, economically and demographically totally the same as you. Our kids have different ability levels when it comes to, intelligence, education, stuff like that, but they're all doing very well. They all get a tremendous amount of individual attention through that process of homeschooling, right? And it's kind of nice. Their teacher really does care about them a lot, right? This isn't just some kind of silly platitude. She probably loves them more than anybody else. Conscientious, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, they're all right. Conscientious children. So conscientious, they're just, they don't always want to do their stuff. They don't always want to do the things they need to do. But we have a lot better luck with them than my parents had with me, I can tell you that much. Okay? So I'm just going off of that standard. Well, gosh, you get to fulfill your vocation. Isn't that wonderful, right? That's a common benefit. Not to put too fine of a point on it, but really the purpose of the marriage is to get the other one to heaven, right? So that's kind of nice. If marriage is your vocation, then this is something you need. Flourishing spiritual and social community. So I already kind of talked about this because, with the time that she is able to sort of commit to these things, she's a Sunday school teacher too. So, so you have these opportunities. I want to talk about some pitfalls here. Egalitarianism, or the sort of French Revolutionary idea that everybody's the same, right? Now, people get irritated when I say the same, but to me, an equal sign means same. That's what it means. And people are not equal in any significant way that makes any sense in practical reality, other than we are all humans and we're all God's creation. So that's all true. But from a practical standpoint, we're different, right? We're manifestly unequal in many ways. If you insist on a team analogy, here's how I've kind of reformulated. We're a team. Oh, look at us. We're a team. Great. But you're not doubles tennis. Okay? You know how doubles tennis works, right? Everybody does kind of the same thing, right? At one point of the game, you're up at the front, the other, that sort of thing. Think of it like football. Like, our football. You wouldn't put a quarterback in for the defensive lineman. Right? That wouldn't make any sense. You wouldn't put a running back in at safety. Not tall enough. Right? So think in that term, in those terms. Another pitfall, focusing only on your own burdens and your spouse's benefits. This leads to resentment. Okay? And again, it makes sense. This explains why marriages are so messed up since the sexual revolution, and really before that. But, things got a lot worse in the 60s than they were before that, even though they were worse in the 1930s than they were in the 1530s, I would argue. Both have duties. Both have burdens to bear. But you both have benefits. You both have rights that come out of this. That's very sensible stuff. All right, do a little bit of dating advice. And of course, you're probably all looking at me like, yeah, not taking any dating advice from that guy. Don't blame you, but, 14 years strong, so, and she's cute. She still fits in her her high school prom dresses. So, not bad. The one thing that I want to say to guys is do not simp. And you know what I mean by that term? You were waiting for me to say it, right, Phil? You needed to hear me say it.
Didn't expect that.
Yeah, don't be a simp.
What does that mean?
It means that you,
That's the same thing when you told me about it.
you put someone on a pedestal sort of illegitimately. You just follow them around like a puppy dog.
No.
Yeah. I think that's right. Am I close?
Yes.
Close enough?
Yeah, basically.
Close enough for a cringe millennial?
Idealizing someone.
There you go.
Like, you can't let it go.
Put them on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Clingy. She wants to be taken on the adventure of life. She doesn't want to be the adventure. Maybe the ladies in the room could confirm that, or maybe not. I don't know. She doesn't want you to chase her around. If she does, that is a massive red flag, and you should get away. Okay? The whole game playing thing is a nightmare. Okay? I don't like using the word toxic because I hate how people use that word. But you don't need to chase someone. That's silly, right? This is totally immature. If you chase her, she will be in control and you will be miserable. You will do all of the things that society still expects you to do after 1960, and you will not get the benefits of it. You will not have control over your household. That makes sense? See where I'm coming from on that? And trust me, I have seen this happen. Seen it with my own eyes. Okay? I didn't simp, just by the way. So I did overhead press her in a parking lot one time though. Like, that was pretty cool. She was impressed. Don't tell her, let her tell you otherwise. For the ladies, Prince Charming is not real. Okay? Your idea of what he can be isn't necessarily right for him or for you. I think the point I'm trying to get to here really kind of flows through a lot of this stuff, is that there are so many ways in which this sort of secular religion of the sexual revolution has just infected our brains and the way we think. And so we don't even recognize ourselves giving into this stuff or just assuming that this is how things are, because it's sort of like a fish. A fish wouldn't know how to tell you what water is, right? They're just surrounded and enveloped by it all the time. So it's the same with this. And especially when our shepherds, whoever they may be, right? And they're certainly not me, okay? So I'm not binding your conscience, this is just my opinion. But when they're sort of hedging a little bit or blurring things because of the dominance of this ideology, they're making it confusing for you. Don't marry a guy thinking you can improve him and make him fit your ideal mold. If marriage is your vocation, there are men who can be a good husband to you. So, look, the thing I would say is he doesn't have to be, women typically value in men in the dating market someone with status and resources. And so that makes it tough for younger guys. And certainly there's a sense in which you can look ahead and say, wow, this guy seems like he could really go places. Right? And since primarily the sort of practical market value that we have here is resources and status, it makes sense. But be careful that your forecast doesn't become something that you rely on, right? Get other people's opinions about that forecast. Okay. So I want to step into, one last thing. I'll talk about that in a minute. So, I think I still have time. Yeah, I got time. All right, so let's go to the less awkward and more financial stuff. So I think it's totally fair for people to say that, for Zoomers to insist that the state of the world is not set up for them to be successful in the long term like their forebears were, especially the boomers, right? Silent Gen, to a large extent, was very concerned about their lineage and their legacy. That severed with a lot of the boomers. And the system, as it sits right now, is not conducive to 25-year-olds figuring out how to buy a house or how to start a household in general, right? All of this other stuff is all relevant to households, right? That's why I call it building the Zoomer household, not buying a Zoomer house, right? All of this advice about how a household ought to work didn't get passed down to you. It didn't get passed down to a lot of people in my generation. It ended with Silent Gen. It was just assumed. But after that, it was sort of like, well, this is how we old people do things, but you're wonderful new kids, and it's the 60s and things, so you should do things much differently. No. So, underneath all of that is some practical considerations. Now, of course, unfortunately, right, I am not yet in Trump's cabinet, so I'm not able to jump into the housing policy and do what Hungary and Poland are doing, where if you establish your family, you have 3 children, they pay your house off. So that would be my number one policy concern if I were in the Trump cabinet. So if you have a line with Trump, let him know. I'm interested, okay? I'll visit DC a couple times. So practically on our level, what can we do? Number one, consider your location and think about smaller areas. If you take 2 houses that are otherwise identical, and they're pretty nice, and you put one of them in Lawrence, and you put the other one where we live in Ottawa, the one in Ottawa is going to be substantially cheaper. Like probably half, hundreds of thousands of dollars cheaper. Okay. And now, so we were talking about this before. What's my commute? My commute's like, I don't know, an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes at worst. It's worth it. Because I couldn't afford the house I have here. So it's worth an extra hour every day. Plus I get to listen to Prime Country on Sirius, you know. I like the 90s stuff. She hates it, so it's my only time. Yeah. Get to listen to Alan Jackson.
Listen to it when you're driving.
Yeah, well, I might start wearing bolo ties, so be careful. So consider that. You might be from a city or something like that. You might be from a big suburb like Overland Park or Olathe or something. Just think about it, right? You're gonna have a shorter timeline to establishing, home ownership if you're just kind of a little bit more country. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Stay close to your parents. I cannot emphasize this enough. Okay, I made a huge mistake. Okay, I went far away. And part of it was because that was just the way my job worked. The market for my job was that way. And about a year after we came home, my mom passed. So she didn't get to see her grandkids a whole lot. And that's not fair to her. And that's my fault. So don't make my mistake. But also don't overread into that either. Okay? I know I made a mistake and it sticks with me. But the reality is, what you miss out on is the support system, right? At the end of the day, nobody really cares much about you, okay? There's a whole lot of people out here in the world that are focused on their own stuff. The people who are always going to care about your well-being is your family. And so the closer you are to them, within reason, right? Like don't live next door, right? Just everybody loves Raymond is instructive, okay?
So don't buy a family compound.
Well, hey, no, I mean, look, a family compound works, but I just, I feel like you should have, I don't know. Like you should have like an underground tunnel in a family compound. You know what I mean? Like there should be
I
some.
was just thinking of
Yeah. No. I'm all for like multi-generational houses, but if you have this like weird separation but not really kind of thing, I feel like that's
Like a Willy Wonka bed.
Oh, jeez. Well, we go back to the marital debt thing, and that gets real awkward. So, Point is, stay close to your parents. I have a friend who, he calls me uncle all the time. I have no idea why. He's a Zoomer. He lives in New Jersey, and he lives in a multi-generational house. There are 4 or 5 generations in their house. I think that's lovely. That's wonderful. And I was kind of joking about the don't live next door to your parents thing. We live across town from her parents. And it's great. Ask for help. Look, making a down payment on the house can be the difference between it being affordable and it not being affordable. And it's awful hard to have 50 grand saved up when you're 25 years old in the year of our Lord 2025. It just is. Conveniently for you, this is a survey by Charles Schwab of millionaires in these different generational groups. Notice that in the pink here, the boomers, they want the next generation, 20% of them want the next generation to enjoy their money while they're alive, but only 56% plan to distribute some of that wealth during their lifetime. Look for Gen X and millennials, okay? Can't believe there are millennial millionaires, right? I'm way behind. This is a problem. But you can see the numbers are far different, right? More than twice as many millennials and Gen X versus the boomers want the next generation to enjoy their money while they are alive. And almost 100% of them plan to distribute some of their wealth during their lifetime. So the prospects for my generation and a lot of Gen X getting help with down payments from boomers, very little. The prospects for you, much different. And I think this is really the key. Because we can make a payment work if we have enough down payment. All right. Using credit to build credit. Discipline and taking a long-term view are very important here. So what are some tools that you can avail yourself of? They have things like secured credit cards. So you have a certain amount of money, you deposit it with the lender, and then they give you a credit card to give you a credit line based on that security. It keeps you from blowing yourself out with interest. Maybe you're beyond that, but I don't know. Use a credit card to pay off a bill every month and then pay the balance of the card off. Do things like that. Monitor your credit. Go to these websites like Credit Karma or whatever. It's free. Just get an account and track it, right? Pay attention to where your credit score is. Pay attention to the things that you want to do, what they require, right? If you're going to buy a house, you probably need to be in the 700s. At least in the 640s, 660s, but probably 7s.
Yeah, I had to get I'll save it, but I had to get a credit card just to build up my credit because it was so bad. And so my interest rate on my car, which was a small loan, but it was astronomical.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have the credit.
Yeah.
And not because of being stupid.
No,
Yeah.
the system is set up that you have to play their game before they'll be willing to give you anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I kind of don't know much about credit because I've never had like a credit card or loans or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So do you start with a certain credit score or do you have to like?
I don't know how that
I
works.
think it's just not
I think you just don't have a record.
You're off the grid until.
yeah.
So not having a record is probably worse than having a bad one, though.
Yeah.
Because that's what they rely on that for. Is like how consistent are you with things? Now, some things they might report, like you paying bills, like electricity bills and stuff like that. Sometimes those things report, or paying your rent. Some of those things will report to the credit agencies, and so you might have a credit score based on that.
Okay.
But it's super complicated, and like you don't have one credit score, man. You have like 37. Okay, like there's all these layers to this whole thing.
I was gonna say this for the Q&A, but since we're talking about it, what do you think about like I don't know, Dave Ramsey, for example, always talks about just never even use credit cards, like don't touch them.
Yeah, well, okay. Dave Ramsey doesn't live in the real world. Dave Ramsey lives in boomer weirdo financial entertainment world. I'm sorry. I don't hate anybody, I think, like probably, but it's real close with Dave. It's real close. Like this guy's whole thing is act like you are broke and all of that so that you can retire when you're 50.
Yeah.
It's degenerate to the core in my mind. In my mind. Okay? I'm not going to eat rice and hot dogs for 20 years and feed that junk to my kids just so I can get a boat when I'm 48. Like, no. That's not happening. And look, his advice is good for the people it's good for. Those people are people who cannot manage debt at all, who just have absolutely no self-control with it. And look, I'm not hating those people, okay? They're people, they need help, and Dave's good for them. But as soon as you get out of that, stop listening to Dave Ramsey. Start listening to people who tell you about your obligation to your family, not this guy. Now, there's some things I agree with him on, like credit cards shouldn't exist. But the problem is, Dave, they do. So you just got to live in the real world. And you can go cry about it, right? I say this a lot. You can go cry about it, but it's not going to change anything. I'm not very nice. Look for opportunities for second income sources, but put first things first. Okay? There are opportunities all over the place for side gigs. If we weren't a homeschooling family and our kids were in school, Lana would probably avail herself of something like that, right? Because there's all kinds of ways to make a little bit of money to do something to keep yourself occupied. Go ahead.
Even homeschooling moms, sometimes they do online jobs, so.
Right. It depends on how you do things, how old your kids are. The younger they are, the more time you need. Depends on your energy levels. You need flexibility still. But speaking to the guys, look, you can get a second thing. Especially once you sort of get built up a little bit, you start getting opportunities. And trust me, be careful. Because you are not, look, this is not, this is your life right now. Okay? We're not in perpetual preparation for our actual lives. This is it. This is what we get. Now, you might think that's not a big deal because you're 20 or 22 or whatever. But it is. It is a big deal. Somebody told me this when I was 25. And I had just gotten married. We had just gotten our first kid hit the ground. It was, I was just absorbed into just getting things done as fast as possible. And somebody told me, hey, chill. You have a family. We're not, you're not trying to run this race super fast just to get to the next thing. Okay. 2 incomes. I'm not going to say too much about this. Set point theory. So this is the idea that if you start out with 1 income, then it's much easier to stick with it. If you start out with 2 incomes, you have a real problem. Because at some point, you're going to see the practicality of stay-at-home mom, at least for the young years of your children's lives, at the very least. Because daycare is an absolute disaster. It's easier. So what happens is, if you have 2 incomes, what happens is your standard of living expands to fill those 2 incomes. And then when baby comes along, you have a problem because you're trying to figure out how to live on less to do something more important. So the idea of set point is, don't set the point too high. Start at 1 and stay there. It's been easy for us in a lot of ways because we did that absolutely from day 1. As soon as we got married, basically she stopped working. And I didn't make a whole lot back then, but according to MIT, child care cost in Johnson County, Kansas is somewhere between $12,000 and $30,000 per year for small kids.
Per child?
Oh no, 12 per.
Yeah.
And then there's economies of scale if you have 3. So.
Is that most updated?
This is the latest MIT cost of living calculator that I pulled.
That's per kid per year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The 12 is, I think.
I think the 30 is too.
You think the 30
Yeah,
is?
'cause
Okay.
I-
It would not surprise me if the 30 was.
So that's great stuff, and maybe I need to get a better source. But here's the thing: it probably depends on age. That's probably part of it too. The younger they are, the more expensive. Here's the thing: is the extra income that you're going to get per kid from her working really worth the stress? Because people are like, "What about socialization?" And I swear, if another person says socialization to me as a homeschool dad, bad things are going to happen. Okay. I get it. But look, 2-year-olds don't socialize. They do what's called parallel play. They're playing with stuff, but they're not really paying attention to each other, especially when they're super young, like younger than 2. What they really need is mom. They look at mom, and they see mom's nearby, so they can go explore. And then they turn around, and they still see mom's there, so they can go a little bit farther. That's kind of how they do things. They're trying to figure out their environment, but they've got to have an anchor. Okay? Their anchor can't be 3 different people. It doesn't work. Plus, it's expensive. And so, is that cost worth it? Keeping her out in the job market, is that worth it? I don't think so. Now, you might say, well, it's easy for you to say, bald guy, because KU pays you pretty well. Fine. Fair enough. But, trust me, I would live the way I lived as a little kid to have that for my kids. So, yeah, I'm trying to, do I have other things here? The recipe for a happy, peaceful home has been here for thousands of years. Until the sexual revolution in the 1960s, happy families operated in the way I've described. Okay, if you saw a happy family, this is how they were. They understood, at least implicitly, this idea of rights and duties, benefits and burdens. They understood the fundamental differences between men and women. They understood the reciprocality. Okay? They understood that guys were expected to figure out how to provide, and women needed to be chaste before marriage. That was the primary value that they had in marriage, okay, before their marriage, is chastity. Okay? It's just part of the culture. Even if you're talking about a place that wasn't Catholic, right? Or wasn't even Christian, really. This stuff is baked in. Okay? The sexual revolution destabilizes the family in ways that are hard for us to see. So I said this before. It's like a fish swimming in the water. We're all living in feminism and the sexual revolution, so we don't even recognize it. We don't even recognize the pathologies that it creates, the sicknesses that it creates. Since the 60s, most women have at least partially abandoned their roles as wives and mothers. Men have been stripped of their benefits of providing a stable home life, and it leads them to want to check out, to give up, to avoid it. Okay? But there's a problem with that. You have a legacy to build. If your vocation is marriage, you have a legacy to build, right? And there's someone there who can help you build that legacy. Okay? Looks like somebody's about to get started on that sort of thing here potentially soon, right? So, same thing. Our society will not survive, let alone flourish, if we fail to rebuild the traditional family. And that's why I think it's important enough that I'm here talking about this, even though, as I said before, these are not the things that my employer would bless.
I won't tell your employer.
Yeah. I'm recording the whole thing, so yeah. Very smart. Break the sexual revolution's conditioning on you. Okay? This is Alex Jones saying we're breaking the conditioning. Kind of a millennial joke, but whatever. It's a right-wing meme. It's fine. It's fine. You got to break that conditioning. You got to get that stuff out of your head. You got to be able to recognize when an idea that's being put to you is just there to make you feel good in the moment, not to help you with your vocation. Provides brief solace, but doesn't further you building a legacy, you building a family. Okay. So, In the spirit of Alex Jones, that's all I have. Thanks everybody for coming. Happy to do questions for as long as possible.